Hey everybody, this is my 125 gallon native tank, and I do realize we are looking at a West African spotted tilapia as I refer to my native tank here, but my regular viewers will know that I'm not really a stickler for biotopes and all that kind of stuff, so while this tank is mostly native, there are some fish in here that are non-native, and this tilapia sort of has a long history of me not really knowing what to do with it, or what tank to put it in, where it's going to go, and that sort of thing. So it's basically spent its life here in my native tank, accompanied by all of my little creek chubs and shiners, and over the years I've had various crayfish and darters and sculpins and all kinds of stuff in this tank. But now I am on the verge of rescaping it and redoing it. I've got some ideas of what I want to do. I don't want to talk too much about it because I don't want to give away any ideas. It's going to be, I'll say it'll be similar in the sense of a native sort of similarity, but it's going to be very different in the sense of sort of visual appearance. It's going to look a lot different. I'm going to change the scape up quite a bit and do a few other things that I hope are going to surprise and thrill everybody. Today I considered going down the stream and setting out my minnow trap. I will say I would like to still get some of the rosy side dace I've talked about putting in here, and I would like to have a fairly large school of them. If I take all of these big fish out of here and vanish them into the mystery of space, I'll have a lot of available bioload, and those rosy side dace, even a big one, is only, a few inches long, very small fish. So I could have a school of, 20 or 30 of them swimming around in this tank, and I think that would look fantastic. But I don't want to set the net out and start catching them prior to me really even beginning work on this tank. There's some equipment I'm going to have to buy for it if I do what I want to do. And then as far as the rescaping goes, one of the big things I'm going to do when it comes to rescaping, I will share, that won't be too much of a secret, is I'm going to redo the woodwork in this tank significantly. And instead of going with the log jam and branches sort of look, fallen tree kind of look, I'm going to go more with the tree stump sort of look. And so what I want to do is get out to Pretty Boy Reservoir in the kayak one of these days, as if I don't get out there 5 days a week. But I want to start looking around for some woodwork that's going to go in this tank. And I think that's what I'm going to start sort of working around, is the woodwork is going to be the centerpiece. And then I'm going to go from there, and we can scape the tank around the big, beautiful centerpiece of wood. But I've still got to get out and find the piece of wood. I've got an idea in my mind what I want it to look like, but, just stumbling upon one of them out the reservoir is not going to be that easy. I should be able to find one. It's just going to be a matter of covering enough distance and covering enough ground. Basically, I get up along the shoreline and just start making my way around the shoreline. Now, obviously, there are some places where you're not going to find any woodwork at all, but there's a lot of places where the wind blows the driftwood, and there's little places where it collects, and I got some hot spots I can go to where I can check out and root through the wood, but most of them always sort of revolve around this kind of wood. In fact, most of this wood came from various locations around my local creeks, streams, and Pretty Boy Reservoir. And so I, just again, finding the sort of tree stump that I'm looking for will not be terribly easy. If you're a long-time viewer, and I doubt anybody's really still watching from way back in the early days, you may remember the woodwork that is in this tank, and I do have a few other pieces of it around and about. That sort of odd piece of wood I have in that little tank in front of my waterfall tank. It looks like a sort of set of horns sticking up. That is actually a piece of this wood here. And this wood is actually the roots of a big tree stump I found out at Pretty Boy Reservoir one year. The water level had gone way down, and I was able to see this really, really good looking tree stump. It was huge, and it was in water that was too deep for me normally to get to. But I was able to get to it in my John boat, and I hoisted it up off the bottom, and I basically drug it over into shallow water And then I waited till the end of summer. I waited 2 more months for the water level to go down low enough that I was able to walk out in the water with my handsaw, and I was able to cut these few chunks of them off of there. So as I've said before, this tank here does have a lot of sentimental value as far as the way the scaping is set up. All of that wood in there, I put a lot of effort into collecting that wood that you see, and so I really don't want to mess with it. The way it is, if I moved it around at all, you would see that the bottom down here is flat and it's been sawed off, and likewise over here is flat and has been sawed off. And these are actually the roots that were sticking downward off of a great big tree stump. I just cut some of the roots off of the periphery, and that's what they look like all these years later. And I can even, to this day, I can take you out to the reservoir and show you where the sawed up tree stump is still sitting in the water. Obviously, it never went anywhere after I was done with it, and it's still sitting there. But I don't want pieces of tree stump. I don't want root chunks. I want a tree stump. And finding an actual tree stump that is going to fit in a tank is going to be a bit of a challenge. I don't mind how long it is this way, but I've only got so much room to work with that way, and then of course I've only got so much depth to work with as well. You know, I'm not going to be bringing home some Paul Bunyan-sized redwood tree, but at the same time, I don't want to bring home some little sapling sort of thing. My inspiration for a lot of this woodwork is they're typically called laydowns, and at Pretty Boy Reservoir you see them very frequently because of beavers. But along the side of any body of water, you'll get erosion within the root systems, and then eventually the trees will lay down into the water. You know, they'll just sort of fall over. And so you'll have these big root masses sticking up along the shoreline, and then the tree will go off down into the water. And when I found this tree stump here, it had much more root on it than it does now. Just over the years, that root has sort of diminished into being kind of, looks almost like a deformed trident or something at this point. But originally, that was a sort of root mass, and it was kind of up in the air this way, and then the branch sort of went down this way. I even had the lighting different when I originally set it up to give it more of a deep water look over here and more of the shallow water look over here. You can even see where I've got the rocks and everything are much taller and steeper to give it that sort of effect of dropping off into the deeper water. So again, this sort of simulates the shoreline out at Pretty Boy Reservoir, although I got to admit that is a pretty poor representation of a tree. But, you know, I'm working in a fish tank here. I can't put an actual tree in my fish tank. But I'm going to try. I'm going to try to find something that will go in here that will be a good tree stump or, you know, facsimile thereof. I've got this piece down here that is sort of its own piece that does not look like, you know, anything else in the tank. It really doesn't fit with the theme of the tank if you go with, you know, this kind of wood there. But I found it. It was a really, really good looking piece of wood, and I brought it home. And, you know, since it followed me home, I had to put it in a tank or do something with it. And so it ended up in this tank just sort of temporarily. And, of course, temporarily has just sort of become permanent. And there it is. But now I need to start really thinking about how I'm going to change this up. I'm really sort of ready to do it before the summer's over. We're already halfway through August. I cannot believe how fast this year's going by. So if I want to do that, I need to start thinking about it. I've got a bigger and better kayak this year, so if I do find even a fairly significant piece of wood, as long as I can get it up and out of the water, I should be able to get it into my kayak and float it back to the boat launch and bring it home here eventually. And then we can talk about how and if I'm going to clean it up and what I'm going to do to it and so on and so forth. And again, it'll be fun to go from there because I like putting together tanks more than I like actually sitting looking at them. I used to put together tanks all the time. I'd take them down and rebuild them and do them over again. I got kind of all that enthusiasm out of my system as I've done this over the years. But I still do enjoy the creative process. You know, building my waterfall tank was a blast. I had more fun building it than I've ever had just standing there looking at it. It's pretty to look at and it's impressive and everything. I'm really happy with the way it turned out. But the process of figuring it out and putting it together and making all my mistakes and going back and redoing it, that was the fun part. And so putting tanks together and designing them and scaping them and thinking about how I want them to look and looking for inspiration, again, that's, to me, that's the joy of fish keeping, is the creative part of it. So I'm really looking forward to kind of digging into this tank and sort of rescaping it and redoing it. Again, I apologize for the glare. Just wanted to get some video tonight, and this is what's been on my mind today, so I thought I would chat about it. So thanks for watching. Don't forget, as I said, this is my 125-gallon native tank, and if you're subscribed, you won't miss any of the updates on this or any of the other various tanks I've got around the house. So thanks again, and I'll see you real soon in the next one.